Can you talk about how the migrant population has changed and evolved over time, and how it maybe differs from what a politician on the stump might conjure when they're talking about those things?
Yeah, I mean, people like for the longest time, it was really when we talked about undocumented migration, about border crossers, what we were really talking about was young Mexican men leaving for economic reasons. And post 9/11, people were going back and forth for decades undocumented, illegally. They were able to work for a few years, go home for a few years, go back. Post 9/11, border security ramps up, and that becomes suddenly an impossibility. And so all these people who were able to move back and forth between their home countries and the United States now can't go back because it's too expensive. It becomes too dangerous because of policies that are put into place in places like Arizona, and so they start bringing their families now. And so now you start seeing more children, more spouses, family groups starting to migrate and then stay. And part of this changing demographic at that time was we really began to conflate, and we still do this now, is terrorism with undocumented migration. This is a very, I mean, right-leaning politicians love to put those two things together because that's a way to just generate more fear on this whole thing, as if Osama bin Laden is coming across the U.S. Mexico border. What people have to keep in mind now is that it's not it's there's been really no documented examples of like full-blown terrorists coming across our. If there had, we would see that person's name and face on every single political poster right now. Um, so you have these changing demographics of family groups coming, but now it's not just about economics. I mean, it really is about violence. It's about political corruption, and increasingly, it's about the impacts of climate change. And I think a country like Honduras is a prime example to see. That country gets devastated by these Category 5 hurricanes, destroys what little infrastructure exists after the last hurricane, and as soon as those floodwaters recede, those people start migrating in mass, and they're young people, their kids, their family. It's anyone that can't that's trying to get out of the way of these disasters. And so, I mean, that's who is coming now. But like as you said, I mean, I think we have some incredibly antiquated ideas about who is coming. And then, and whenever someone commits a crime, whenever an undocumented person commits a crime in the United States, that person becomes now the poster child for all evils of migration, despite the fact that it's literally like 1 in a million of these examples. We talk about these assaults and these things that make these headlines, as if it's only migrants who are hurting people in this country, right? But if we look at statistically, you're more likely to be killed by an American citizen, right? But obviously, especially in these election years, the evil migrant is the trope that the American politicians have relied on for over 100 years to deflect away from from these the actual problems that we should be addressing.
Yeah. So what about like I know you said the bulk of this book and this project focuses on Honduras. I know like a lot of Latin America, it's gone through its share of regime changes, and it had a military coup, and it's got like a kind of sort of democracy. Like what how does the Honduran government feel about so many people leaving, and the whole smuggling industry that's taken root there?
Well, I think we got to keep in mind that Honduras is, the original banana republic, and the U.S. we've been monkeying with their political system and their economic systems for over 100 years now. One of the striking things to me when this project began, and there's a section in the kind of first part of the book where, I'm spending all this time with Honduran military police who are being trained by the United States government to stop their own citizens from leaving Honduras.
Yes.
I spent time with this special task force called GOET, which is based in Honduras, and they report to the American embassy. I mean, and they get a lot of financial support and logistical support from the U.S. Border Patrol, who are showing them how to catch their own citizens at their northern border. So the Honduran government is doing the bidding of the United States to keep these people from leaving. I mean, and when you start to think about like, okay, the U.S. government is putting political pressure and helping Honduras to stop its own citizens from leaving a country that's fleeing political corruption, that's fleeing climate change. the political corruption and climate change, both heavily fueled by U.S. Forces, interests in different ways. Um, so it's like we have this. It's just this crazy, crazy system where the U.S. is like we're trying to stop this movement of people, despite the fact that we are largely responsible for this movement of people. And so, for me, this is the real rub, especially in these current political moments where people are so anti-immigrant and not understanding where their food comes from, not understanding that migrant labor in this country is the backbone of so many industries. And then if these fantasies about kicking all of these migrants out, right? Trump talks about these, what would mass deportations look like? I'll tell you what mass deportations would look like. It would look like a crashing economy across the board because we would have so many industries that would cease to exist. But most people want this to be laid out to them in an easy way. They want to know who to hate. They want an easy answer. When you start to kind of talk about the complexities of these things, people's eyes gloss over, and then it's oftentimes too much for them. But I do think that the only way we're going to move forward with I think discussions about comprehensive immigration reform, about what to do next, is to kind of understand how the system actually works, and for us as American citizens to start to be accountable. We're all complacent in this system, and we benefit daily from migrant labor, from smuggler labor. We just oftentimes don't want to admit it.
In your conversations, the many days, months, weeks, hours that you spent talking to these smugglers, did how often, if at all, did politics come up? Like, do these folks feel any sense of political agency, or that the democratic process is something that can or has worked for them at all?
I mean, I think they're acutely aware of its failures, and so there were lots of discussions about the failures of Honduras to support them, to provide them with jobs. Um, there was lots of discussions about the political corruption and how there was this deep mistrust of officials in that country. Same thing in Mexico. Smugglers would talk about. I mean, they love talking about Donald Trump because he was incredibly good for business. Because every time he said something crazy and said, "Oh, we're going to be doing this new thing and we're going to be shutting this whole thing down," smugglers could raise their prices without actually having to change anything. And so they're sort of aware of what's happening politically, because it sort of suits them, economically. But I would say, yeah, but politics would come up in different kinds of ways. Partly in that they could recognize sort of the racism that existed against them in Mexico, in the United States, but they also could recognize that democracy was theoretically going to function better in the United States.
Mhm.
That was the hope. Even under Trump, that was the kind of hope. Um, but yeah, it's mostly. I think the bigger discussions was just about how there was just a deep mistrust of Latin American, governments. And it reminds me. I mean, I have a former student of mine, Amelia Frank Vital, who's now at Princeton. She did a dissertation on returned Honduran migrants, youth who were being sent back to Honduras, and it was this like reintegration program for these kids who hadn't been gone that long, but the government was like, "Oh, we need to figure out a way to kind of bring you back into the fold and make you sort of feel kind of welcomed." And the kids were like, as soon as I can, I'm getting the hell out of here again. I mean, there was no for them there was no going back. And I think for a lot of Hondurans, they don't see that political system as one that ever could welcome them back, or that they would ever want to go back to. And that's why Mexico is becoming a destination country now, because it's despite all its problems, it's still a better place than some of these other countries.
For the smugglers in particular that you work with, what is, from a policy perspective, what is the best outcome for them? So I was thinking about it, like, is it a scenario in which their services are no longer needed, or is it something where they can still do this job if they want to and earn money for themselves and for their families, but maybe just do it in a safer way, both for them and the clients that they're working with?
I think everybody would prefer if there was no need to hire smugglers, including the smugglers. I think that many of them would love to find something else. And in the book, there was various moments where smugglers I was working with were trying to get out and do different things, and I'm trying to my failed attempts to help them, kind of walk the straight and narrow, and them also lacking oftentimes the social skills to kind of do those things.
Mm,
Um, but I think everybody involved would would much rather just be able to move back and forth between their home country
mm,
and these receiving countries to be able to work for a fair wage, work safely, and then be able to go home. I mean, I think that the American public, we think that like migrants are coming here to steal our jobs and to
mm,
live the American dream, but migrants don't want to stay here. I mean, so many of them would much rather prefer to go. That's why you drive across Mexico, you see so many half-built houses of migrants building these, these dream homes that they're hoping to eventually move back into. Many of them don't. They die in the United States. They're never able to go back. Um, I think that we need to think about, and this is not always a popular thing, but we had a guest worker program for many years in the United States. It then became it was incredibly abused by employers who were then turned it into the slave labor market. Um, but but those folks, I mean, we still have these work visas now, but these folks would much rather be able to go back and forth and not have to rely on a smuggler and all the kind of shadiness that's required to kind of be in that world. And I think that at the end of the day, we're going to have to move towards some kind of model where we recognize this freedom of movement and we allow people to do it safely, and we respect that. But I don't know. It doesn't seem like we're very close to that on any level.